Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. And today I'm with Leah Tharin, and she's head of product at Jua.ai, but also a product and growth advisor for many startups. And she has a large background and experience in product in companies of very different sizes and industries, ranging from Microsoft to smaller startups, and also a podcaster as well. So, Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So can you start by giving us a few more words of the small introduction I gave about yourself, with what you have been doing lately?
Yeah, sure. So the shortest introduction of me that I came up with is I've been for 22 years in tech, and started on the technical side, then got to UX, understanding why are people doing what they do. And then I suddenly ended up on the product side. So I tried to change what people want to do. Well, not influence, but change the products that they use, for the problems that they have. And that's where I am right now. So I've been the product lead at Small PDF, which is a 50 million monthly active user platform in the B2C space, or largely in the B2C space. And now I'm doing something completely different, which is organizing the product as a head of product at Jua, which is a weather and climate prediction startup. And we're doing everything with machine learning. And what I do, I guess, as a last context, is I have my full-time role. I do advisory with companies, usually in the B2B space or B2C that wants to go into the B2B space. Mm-hmm. And these companies are usually, I would say smaller than 100 million ARR and probably above 30, something like this. And I also write a lot of content about this. I have a podcast. I do quite a lot of things now that I'm thinking about it. So yeah, that's the introduction of me. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I usually start by trying to dig some stories about strategy. So I'm wondering, I would like to ask you, maybe the last time you did a, strategy creation process, if we can call it that way. What was the setup and how did you go about it? Maybe some of the steps and tools or frameworks you use along the way. Which story would you like to start with?
So I think I'm a big proponent of simple strategies, right? So the goal is always the one pager. Everything else that comes afterwards is kind of let's be honest, nobody reads it. Except maybe the C-level, sometimes they have time to read this kind of stuff. People like me, they read strategies. Yeah, sure. But in the end, you have to produce a strategy for whomever you want to communicate it with. And that's usually the people on the ground, the people that are operationally working on the products and everything. And so the first principle I would say is create something that is simple. And we try to do this also at Small PDF for defining the strategy for the next couple of years. And this is, it's a very important thing to get right, because this one pager always changes depending on what you want to have on the one page, right? So an important thing is to get your ICPs right. You need to know to whom you're selling. And that in the end defines everything. Who are you targeting? Who is your product market fit? It's people are always talking about product market fit in the sense of, we have the most amazing product. Well, for whom, right? You can have the most fabulous baby stroller that you produce in the world, but if the people that you're selling it to are not parents, it's kind of pointless. And that's the first thing. So know exactly who you want to sell to, or who you're selling to, and then also define the differentiators. And what we tried to do at Small PDF as well was to really nail this this definition, and really also nail the differentiators in terms of the brand. So if you look at Small PDF, which is a document management platform around PDFs, and you compare it to Adobe, you might think that they serve the same people. It's kind of the same product. You can work with PDFs and so forth. But one of the simple differentiators that we had was really simplicity and the ease of use, how easy it is to get onboarded. You do not have a complicated registration process. And these things are now part of the product. It's not anymore just like what can you do with PDFs, but like how easy is it to get started? How is it communicated? How does the platform reach out to their users and so forth? And all of this is part of a strategy. And that's what we do in product-led growth businesses. And I'm trying to do the same now as well as a product strategy inside of Jua, which is a completely different beast to tackle because we're selling way, way higher than we do to B2C. So like this is, enterprises, that kind of stuff. And the principles are the same. You need to know to whom you're selling to and what makes you different. And I guess that's a good summary in short, yeah.
Okay. I would like to. I have some questions around that. You go to the one pager, which is to me the conclusion of a strategy. I mean, or how you think about strategy. So maybe starting from the ground up. For example, we are saying let's put simplicity in the one pager. But how do you define simplicity? How do you find this differentiator? And how do you know that's a good differentiator for you as a company?
Yeah. So that's a very good point. So the first thing is a differentiator needs to be really differentiating in nature. Like it needs to exclude something else. It needs to be simple to understand. Like, because if I use a word that someone does not understand, then it's also useless. And how can you measure this? You can measure this by checking on the alignment when you ask the people who are consuming your strategy whether they understood it. That can be investors, that can be your people internally. So you can do just a simple survey. What is our strategy, right? Can you summarize the strategy in like 2 to 3 sentences? What are we doing here? And you would not believe how difficult this is to get right. You need to talk about it a lot. New joiners are also joining at some point in the company. They don't have the entire context that you did before, like the entire workshops and the exercises. None of this happens. So how do you come up with good differentiators and whether they matter? Well, first of all, you should ask your customers and the user base if you want to expand, of course, right? So like the non-existing users yet. And there's different methods to this in terms of like what is really important and like what differentiates these users. But I would say a very good frame of work to start with this is to always focus on outcomes. And I'm very, very specific about this in the sense that if something that you say is a differentiator does not really lead to a customer success, like something is simple to use, or like we have superior support. For instance, we push down the response time of our support from 4 or 5 hours to 15 minutes. Like these are really clear, measurable outcomes. And that's also how I define the strategy. So you will not find in my strategy mentions of features necessarily. Neither on the domain strategy, so if you go down more like to the bigger groups that you have in a company, what we do talk about is not feature roadmaps as a means to deliver on the strategy. What we talk about is what kind of problem spaces do we think are coming up that will be relevant. So for instance, if you translate this, like what is happening with ChatGPT at the moment, right? So like how does that influence the strategy of a company? Well, it seems to be that it's not hard to find information, but it seems to be hard to find the right kind of information in the language that I speak. And that is a problem to address. I did not mention to you how I'm going to solve it, but I just defined the problem that might be worth it to focus on. And I can tell you also from personal experience that Microsoft also works in this way. Because, like Microsoft now and Google is having problems and so forth. So this is what they're focusing on, right? Like they try to find some answer. They're not telling you what kind of answer that it is, but that the money is somewhere in this problem. And that's what's fascinating about it, yeah.
That's interesting. But I going back in the process, so I really love how you frame, okay, I select this problem, how I express it. But behind the scenes, you mentioned kind of the trade-offs. You say, hey, if I'm going for this one, I'm not going for that other one. So that's the one I want to know. What's maybe going back to one last experience in which you had to do this trade-off, and what was the process to define one or the other?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the very first thing is that you have to make sure that you're not missing something. So the first one, that's the very first step. So the first step is you try to collaboratively find with your team what could be good. And this is a stage in terms of brainstorming where you try not to cross off anything. It's just like the more ideas, the better. Then you group them, you do a synthesis, like the usual stuff. What you definitely do not want to do is have management draft like a couple of points and then people try to find solutions for them, right? We try to welcome everything. So that's the first step. You get everything in. Then you have people.
By the way, just to do a deep dive on the one, how will that look like in maybe past experience? Is this a big mirror board, big document,
exactly.
or?
Exactly. So what I do is I usually try to derive it from the top. So you have a Miro board that looks traditionally like in the very middle you have, this is the best product that we can build, right? So like it's this big yellow blurb with a very comical font. And then from this, we derive the kind of areas of improvement that we can do. So for instance, we want to have the best document editor solution. So there are factors that are tying into this. What is necessary for this? Well, we need to be able to change documents on the fly, right? So like, or collaboration or whatever it is that you have around this. And then you have other factors coming out of this. So like what is necessary for our customers or the users to collaborate with documents on the go, right? And now because you added the word on the go, now we're talking about maybe a mobile solution at some point, but maybe not. We don't know yet, right? So what is important for that? Maybe it needs to be offline. Maybe it needs to have connectivity, like some sort of guarantee that it connects and everything. But you build out this tree. And I usually try to do this on a Miro board because if you do it in a document, you kind of already rank stuff, like the stuff that comes first gets the most attention and so forth. So it usually looks like a really freaky tree on Miro without any deliveries. It's important. We're not talking about the features, but we talk about which problem addresses which problem, right? So like if we solve all of these, how does that lead to the best product in the end? It's almost like a discovery tree that Teresa Torres does. Almost, right? So it's very, very similar looking to this. So what do we have here as a big opportunity? Is it too big to execute? Yes. So what kind of contributing smaller problems do we have that go into this? We do it collaboratively. And then in product, we try to find substantiation to the different little parts. And then you need to argue for it, right? So like we're not just basing everything on feelings, but okay, what are the indicators from the market? Do we have already existing data for this? So that work afterwards comes and ultimately leads to the one pager that looks very simple, but had a lot of work in it.
Love it. But so two questions about that. The first one is, this is a lot of work. I mean, you said something along the lines of you don't need to miss anything, but now if you are collaborating in this tree can have hundreds of opportunities, and doing this analysis for 100 of them, it's a lot of work. So how do you go about that? How do you scope this work?
So I would say it's coming relatively close to hundreds. That's true, but you usually have a good sense of which ones you want to investigate, right? So like it's not just like, okay, now we're trying to compare 100 of them. Sometimes you can do this, but like what I would do with the teams, and this is also how we did it, right, from the bottoms up. So like for instance, a domain strategy, and a domain can be, let's say, collaboration. Right, so like we facilitate everything around collaboration because we believe, also from a company strategies point, that collaboration is the next big thing. Why do we believe this? Miro, all these other products that are now gaining a lot in market share and so forth, COVID, everything that pushed to collaboration. So let's say we agree that this is a very important point to push to. So what the domains do for this part is they make assumptions what kind of trends are happening in the next couple of years. And then they try to match up with the problems that they see. Yes, this seems to line up. Because a strategy is not useful if you design it for today. We're trying to design it, where is the world in 5 years? I mean, that's the kind of point to it. So a very good example would be if you're in the middle of the COVID pandemic, you can design a strategy on how it is to be and living inside of COVID, of course, right? With all of your features and everything. But it may not address what's happening in a couple of years. So the strategy should be a way to get there in a couple of years. You're not building the car for today's roads. You're building it for when it comes out. And in a way, you want to prioritize it under these points. A lot of it is based on opinions, of course, but you need to focus. And the way that I like to think about it is that these business ideas that we have, or the business research, is protecting the actual research that we then put into that is really detailed. So for instance, I say, okay, I think this opportunity is about 10 million worth. Why? Because of this and that, and this is how many people that we affect. And if people agree, then we say, okay, now we put a lot of effort into it. So like now we do actual research. And then if it's a really, really big one, then you might say, okay, the business case is solid. The research confirms it. Now we might build an MVP to even further validate whether this actually works. So this is how I think about it. Business protects research and research protects engineering.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. The second question I had before, I think that ties directly into this one. My concrete question is, at what granularity level you define the strategy? Because in this tree, you can have these big domains like collaboration or simplicity or that was it, but for sure there are kind of more ingrained opportunities in there. So would you say that the strategy sits at this very, okay, we want to invest in collaboration, or is something a bit more deeper?
Yeah, that's a very good question, but this depends, unfortunately, on the company size. I usually use this kind of frame. In any company, there is one thing that you should do, or like that's at least how I do it, right? So like there should be always a separation between what management believes and what the product teams believe, and or growth or whatever your product is. So the top, so there is some separation somewhere, and the top layer at the moment, for instance, for Jua, where I'm working right now, is that we say, well, we want to simplify the messaging. It's extremely important for us that we need to simplify the messaging on what we do here to connect it with the market. Now, this might not sound like a big thing, right? It's kind of like, well, simplifying a message, well, put someone from marketing on it. But the thing is, the size of the opportunity, like the gap of where we are today and what we would like to do, because we need to create awareness. What does it mean if you have superior weather data? Mm-hmm. This particular opportunity that lives in there is huge. So that's why we defined it as kind of like, okay, that's this one thing. So now let's say you have this. Now you need to kind of define if you are huge, like if you are a relatively big company, let's say you have the size of Miro, 1,500 or whatever. Yeah. You might need to define already from the top down now the domain strategy where you say, okay, this domain is focusing on this domain is focusing on this, and this domain is focusing on this. And then the teams come up and connect from there. Yeah. Whereas with the small company where we are, this, what I just told you, is already sufficient for the 4 or 5 teams that we have to come up with their own ideas. Okay, so what can we do to help simplify the message, for instance, on the front end or with the API, with documentation and so forth, customer research, whatever it is. So it really depends. But I would say as a good frame of work, let's take a very typical size. Let's say you have 100 people, 100, 120 people. You usually have at that size 10 teams-ish that work on product, if they're cross-functional. Yeah. At this point, you probably have 2 or 3 domains. And in these domains, you have about 2 to 3 teams. One of them is growth. Maybe you have a product domain in one and another product domain there. So I cannot answer your question, but because unfortunately it depends. Yeah.
Yeah, but I will rephrase what you said and maybe kind of dig deeper into that. But
go for it.
Feels like from a management perspective, you're saying, hey, we have these kind of these big domains, and say this is the kind of overall direction of the domain. So one word for this domain. Then the teams will have kind of go deep in the hierarchy and say, okay, for this domain, then for this direction of the domain, we need to do this big level opportunities that way. And then they will go deep and deep into the solutions. That kind of summarize what you said?
Yeah, I would say so. But yeah, as you said, like if you have really great teams that are very independent, then it can also be that you can be much more free. I tend to give more autonomy if we know that, okay, certain teams, you don't need to give any guidance. You're just like, okay, what we want to do. We want to be more efficient, for instance, in acquisition or whatever it is. And you're a growth team. So come up with your own strategy. There, you can be more loose. So I would say it depends on how it depends. You know what I mean, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Because the smaller we are, the more open we can be with our processes. And I strongly believe in this. And I also have to say at this point, I focus really with whatever I'm saying right now. I would say this works to about 400 or 500 people. But then you need to have another layer, then you really need to have a very separate definition of, okay, we have a growth strategy, we have a product strategy, we have a company strategy, and all of it is kind of detached. So, it depends.
Yeah. One thing that maybe I want to try to see if we can get back to an example, but you say, for example, before simplicity as a differentiation, but I would assume simplicity kind of is one of the things, or messaging even for Jua, but I'm not sure you have domains, but it's one of the things that cross many domains. So in those cases, how will you merge kind of the domain strategy with the general ESP?
So this is very important, that the differentiators, or like the simplicity, like the simplicity to use, or whatever you want to do, or like we are personal to the customer or whatever, that this is above all the domains. Right. Yeah. So this is not, you don't have, maybe you have different, okay, I've seen it as well that you have differentiators on the domain level. Sure. But the problem is this: we have built organizations historically that are separated by functions: marketing, sales, and product. So your marketing talks to you to get you into the product. Product designs the entire experience, and sales is trying to convince you as well, like if for the bigger accounts. The problem of this is that this is not the experience of the user. You still want to kind of have a unique, uniform experience. You don't want to be handed off from one person to the other. And this is Conway's law, right? So one way to kind of counteract with this, because this is hard to build up, because people are still working, you have a marketer, and then you have a product person, and then you have a salesperson. You still have to make sure that it's clear to everyone how you want to differentiate yourself. So let's say we say that support is extremely important to us. We want to have the world's fastest support. Let's just assume this, right? Like, just for an example. How is this relevant to sales? Well, if sales knows that this is one of our strong selling points, they will make sure two things. First of all, they're going to mention it, because it's one of the differentiators. We said that we are really good with this, right? So it helps them sell. But on the other hand, they're not going to introduce anything on their side that keeps the customer, hopefully, from the support. So for product teams, this could also mean the same. Everything that we decide needs to be easy to support. If we're aware of this, then we need to make sure that whatever we build, support are the first people who know about this. And that, I don't know, the support loops work in everything, right? So like, I have a problem, boom, zack, there's just like a new chat agent available. And that's what I mean, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're on the account cancellation page, whether you have a problem with your billing, or whether you cannot use the tools in this product. The claim is that we have superior support. It doesn't matter where. And this promise you can only hold if everybody is incentivized on it and makes sure that the stuff is also exercised. So that's why I say differentiators have to happen usually on the company level.
Yeah, interesting. And then going back to, let's say, our process in which we kind of created this big tree, and you need to kind of sit down with, it's not a product decision, which are the differentiation, because you said it's not sitting at company level. Who will usually, or in your experience, who sits in this table, let's say small PDF, who is sitting in the table to decide what we will want to differentiate on?
I don't agree. It's actually a product decision in a product-led company.
Interesting.
So in a product-led company, this is actually the decision of it's not the decision, right? Like, this is the thing. It's always difficult, because if you say like, okay, product led means customer centric. So we still discuss together what we want to do and what we do not want to do. Sure, it can happen that the board says, or the C-level, no, we don't believe in this, we do it this way. But the thing is this: if you have built up trust over multiple quarters that what you do is driving impact, then leadership will also give you more leeway to actually do this. And product is very good in this, because we tend, if the job is done right,
it's a big if.
we can show, it's a big part. One of the reasons why I get good advisory gigs, because not everybody does. If we can show the impact with the customer through what we did, whatever this method was, which is usually data gathering and being informed, then we can stop relying on product sense. And this is one of these big problems where we have this idea that the Steve Jobs type will somewhat figure it out. It's like, oh my God, we need someone that has the best visionary ideas. I can absolutely guarantee you that some of the best ideas that you put into your strategy are probably living inside the head of one of your interns, or someone that you did not believe about, or like that you did not think in. And that's so. I would say the strategy, yes, technically it's true. The C-level decides, of course, and they're also approving. But I had it very rarely that there was such a big disconnect that people were just like, in sales-led organizations, you usually have this more where people are just fighting like, oh, it's more important that this was my idea and this idea, right? Like this is how they try to convince each other that someone has a better opinion. I don't care for your opinion if the substantiation is solid, because then I care about the facts, and that's what it should be. I'm not perfect. I also, probably prioritize things because they were my idea. I'm not perfect, right? But we try to avoid it as much as we can with the processes.
Yeah, the way I will kind of maybe think about what you just said is kind of this. It's all about first trust. So you mentioned about kind of product delivering results. It's actually building trust to let people or somehow people know that you know what you are doing, so you can decide. And the other one is, it's not who owns the decision. I mean, it's a debate between kind of probably many people, and at the end of the day, it's about a good substantiation that will make everyone decide on the same direction. That's a good point. One thing that I believe we kind of didn't. Let's say that there's a conflict in this area, which is saying someone is saying, "Hey, I will want to focus on this one." Other one saying, "Hey, no, we should focus on this one." And again, I don't care who is in the table. But we have this problem, which is like, hey, the business is saying, hey, this is a 10 million idea, so it's kind of only opinion. And the other one is saying, hey, I also believe this is a 10 million idea, but we don't have yet done the research. So how have you feel that in the past, these kind of trade-offs and saying, okay, how do we decide which path to take?
Yeah, kind of. And there are some unhealthy habits that I don't have an answer for yet as well. So I don't know. Let's see where this goes. So let's say you have an OKR planning and you have me as the product leader, and I know there's pressure from the business, like everywhere, right? So everything needs to be efficient and so forth and so forth. And I say, well, Nacho, I don't want you to come up with any idea that is not worth less than 5 million, right? Just saying, okay, whatever, right? So but now I put you already into a position. You're in a specific play field and you need to find 5 millions. What if these 5 millions are not there to be found? What you will do, and that's normal, and I understand also where the leaders are coming from, is you will find the $2 million idea, and then you will prop up the numbers, whether you want it or not. It's like, what if we get 50% uplift here? What if we get maybe $10 more per customer over here with this idea? And one of the problems is that this is kind of the same that happens with salespeople. If we pay a salesperson more money, the more deals that they close, then they will close more deals. But that does not necessarily equate to the quality of it. So going to this again, it's extremely important that in whatever we do as leaders, that we try to set intelligent goals. So if I say, Nacho, find the best strategy for the next 3 months for this domain, or for 2 years or 5 years even, there needs to be some kind of qualifying factor in there that ensures that you're incentivized to find the best idea, and not just to make me happy, like, oh yeah, Nacho found a $5 million idea. That's great. If you cannot execute on it, it's not worth it. So we need to have some kind of checks and balances, but not with people in the sense of like, oh, okay, like the CEO checks on this. I think we have to be really careful about what we demand from teams. And in my opinion, it is always that no idea is accepted without a proper hypothesis and a problem description that is easy to understand for everyone. And that's why, because the reason for this is that we can talk about the most simple thing and think that we talk about the same stuff, but we're not. I've seen this so many times in every company that I've been with. We talk about an editor. Okay, yeah, sure, yeah, it's easy. Yeah, like that, like a small PDF editor. So editing inside of each side and this side. No, so what do you mean with editing? Like putting just a white square over it and then you just write over it? Or can you edit the text itself and so forth? And this is the main problem that we have. Disagreement starts when misalignment happens. So I would say simplify, and make clear what you want. Not in the form. I don't care whether the hypothesis is 10 pages long. I just care that people understand it. And that's what I would say. So I know it's not a perfect answer, but the conflict starts when we're misaligned.
It triggers a different question, because we came from the one pager, which the one pager usually synthesizes many things. how do you kind of deal with this ambiguity of saying, okay, I want to have it super simple and small, but also want people to understand what actually this exactly means?
Yeah. So how do we go into investor meetings, right? This is also where the strategy happens. What we do in investor meetings is we have the simple facts ready, but in case you ask, we have the substantiation ready. This is how you build trust, right? So like if you and me work together for 10 years, you usually know that my stuff is substantiated or not, whatever, right? Or you have some kind of experience with me. And this is the same way that I structure strategy. You have to ask yourself on the finished product, which one of these points are the most shaky? Which ones would I have trouble arguing with? Where do I get the most questions? Don't be satisfied, because you can test your strategy as well, right? You can explain it to your teammates. You can explain it to other C-levels. You can explain it to the intern again. And then you get questions. And if you get questions from people, that means usually, okay, we did not clarify it enough. And if you get questions often, you should not start thinking, oh, these people are stupid. It's maybe, no, you're stupid. You probably didn't manage to explain it in a simple way. So we need to improve on this. So in a way, what I would say is that structure this like an experiment and try to falsify the strategy. Only if you start to struggle with falsifying it, then you have a really good strategy. Because if you cannot back it up, then it's very easy for someone to just throw a random fact out there and you're just, I don't know, I never looked into this. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah, got it.
No.
You mentioned a couple of times different timeframes for the strategy. So what's your ideal timeframe, or what makes the timeframe change?
Oh, I love this question. So if I'm at Microsoft, I would probably generate a 5-year strategy. That can make sense. But as you see, every strategy that has been created 6 months ago is now completely already in the bin because, things happen in the market. Okay. So it's still important, I think, to have a long-term strategy. And I'm saying long-term and not a specific time frame because, again, it depends in which kind of life cycle of the company you are. There is no point in saying where you go in 5 years if you're a product or a company that still tries to find product market fit. The likelihood that you die in the next 18 months is 90%. So define your strategy on what happened, like almost even, you can even go milestone based sometimes. I really like this. Okay, so in the next 6 months, if we do not get traction, right? So you prepare yourself for the worst, then we have to shift into a different gear. There will be a stop in hiring and engineering. We just focus on distribution. Let's go. And so these can be very specific strategies as well. Okay, and I like it when people are frank about what it is, right? Because with product market fit, it's always about survival. With growth companies, once you found product market fit and you start to scale, it's not so much about surviving anymore. It's about growing fast enough in an efficient enough way. And usually there are some numbers out there that investors love, and usually that's the 5 years because most of the discounted the DCF calculations are actually happening on a 5-year scale. But I would say the truth is somewhere in between. I don't even like yearly roadmaps, So I mean, it's like what we do in the next 3 months.
Okay.
Right, but that we kind of know. But whatever comes afterwards builds on what we just learned in the next 3 months. So I'm very wary of even yearly roadmaps. So you have to be careful that you don't commit too specific in a strategy. So the longer it becomes, the less specific you want to be because you want to be able to change it again.
Yeah. And now they mentioned that, I mean, how often will you review it? And do you have or said in a way, do you have a formal review process for the strategy?
I would say in a small company where I am right now, this is a thing that happens every 3 months, like very, very early. But it's not like, okay, now there's a strategy meeting and then we talk about it. It's just like in my experience, usually every couple of months, something happens. You learn something new about the market that is crazy, that is changing the strategy. And that's fine. It's fine, right? Like it's really fine. However, there is one thing that you need to consider. And I think we don't do this enough also in tech. There's one factor, and that's the human factor of employment, right? Because if you change your strategy and you have to lay off people because you have to hire other skilled people, then the story changes. There, make sure that you have enough runway and with your ideas and that you have also a risk profile that makes sense. So for instance, I don't know, we're building a new mobile application or we build out a desktop application or whatever. Have a strategy that is
I can tell you,
enough.
we are building a metaverse and we're investing tens of billions per year.
I'm not gonna comment on that one, but like, yeah, that's exactly what I mean, right? Like, be sure that you have, like, as soon as you involve people into this, because this is not about, oh, we can take the mobile developers and now put them on a backend product. That's just, that just does not work anymore. So there is the only exception where I would say protect people and put more time into it as you usually would, because hiring is difficult. Hiring is very, very difficult, and letting people go is something that you should avoid at all costs. It's not always avoidable. I'm aware of it, but we can do a better job there. So I would say, yeah, that's my kind of conditional answer.
I like it. And maybe switching gears a bit. Do you see a strong difference in strategy creation for companies that are, knowing that you work with a lot of kind of product-led companies, difference between product-led versus, I want to say sales-led, but kind of other types of companies?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good example. So the first thing that happens when I get into a sales-led company is I stop talking about product-led. Usually what happens is they want to do some kind of expansion. So this is why I said at the start, like, I advise companies that are below 100 million and above 35-ish something, because these companies have something in common. Usually they have figured out one particular thing really well. They know how to sell to their customers. Their sales-led motion works really, really, really well. And what I do usually is to try to educate them how much work this is to now move down market, which is a usual movement that they do. So down market means we go from a B2B segment into a more populated B2B segment, or we go even into a B2C space, because we have not really worked with those. So a typical thing is like you have, I don't know, typical enterprise customers, but now you want to also serve individual developers better. That's a very typical one. And the way you have to do this is so multi-layered, because if companies have never done product-led, they need to get so many things in order before they can even do this, that we need to have a strategy to fix a couple of things in place first, before we can even talk about product-led growth. And a typical one is to get your data infrastructure in order. You need to get this in order first. You cannot restructure sales or marketing or product before you can measure anything. And that's the problem, right? So the reason why I'm saying it in this way is that whatever you put into this particular strategy for a sales-led company, because you're usually affecting 500-600 people, is that whatever you do needs to be also useful in case you would not proceed with it. And more data, insights for instance, salespeople is always useful. Even if you just stay with your sales-led approach and you don't know whether you can do product-led growth or whatever, but getting an order into your data is always a good thing. And this is one of the common mistakes that I see, where people just say oh, just do product-led growth. Here's 10 tips and then just put it on. Of course, nobody's doing this. Of course not. You need to do it layered, and you need to understand the risk profile of a company. So for 1 year, we're going to commit on this. So in the first 6 months, we're going to get this in order, and then we measure what the impact on the business was, and then we maybe bring growth teams. We do this, we do that. So this is more of a layered strategy that builds up on individual milestones that even work if you don't go for fully product-led growth.
Yeah, interesting. I like the approach of kind of milestones instead of big roadmaps, kind of having kind of these checkpoints more concrete. It's very interesting. Okay, I think I'm looking at the time. I think it's a great time to ask my usual closing question, which is what I'm not asking. What may be an interesting learning you had about strategy that you had along the way that we haven't covered yet?
Well, we haven't covered yet. So we covered a lot of stuff. So let me think on it.
That's so, good job. Good job.
I think it's important to differentiate in your messaging. So on one hand, you want to be aspirational. You want to go somewhere where no one has gone before, right? So we want to be inspirational and we want to be motivational and everything. And I understand that. And I think it's very important too. What I see a little bit critical is that still too many leadership teams and C-levels think that the entire company thinks like them. And then what happens is that these initial goals of, for instance, I don't know, we want to be the best in something, become, we need to have 100,000 more closings in a very specific segment. So one thing is very inspirational and the other one is just dry numbers, which nobody can really But for C-level, it's kind of the same. You're like, oh, if we do this, then we are the best. And it's like, be clear about for whom you create the strategy. And that's why I said simple, but also inspiring at the same time, of course, right? Without going completely off the hook. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think Google's strategy is something like organize the information of the world. That leaves you very, very open, and it makes a lot of sense what the company's purpose is. And this is a huge, huge company. They're not saying like what their aspirational goals are in the strategy directly in a monetary value. So I would say, don't forget the inspiration in it, right? Something that is simple for people to also tell others. You're not going to tell your mom that you're going to close another 100,000 contracts in a B2B space, but you might be able to tell her, hey, we are building something that organizes the information of the world. Yeah. You know, sounds a bit lofty, but that's what I think about it.
Do you think that the one-pager kind of pays that bill? So it's can be inspiration on a one-pager, or will you use another artifact?
Hey, my favorite example is Nike in the 80s. They had it in their strategy. They said crush Nike. Okay, you can discuss whether this is helpful or not, but that is going to catch your eye. You might even have afterwards, you know, like you might have an ambition that has numbers in it afterwards. Okay, I give you that. But to have this on an official logo and you know exactly that someone from the other company will read it, that's pretty cool. And I think we cannot underestimate that.
Interesting. Okay, I would like to wrap up with two rapid-fire questions. So one quick question, one quick answer, not related to strategy. And the first one I'm intrigued by is what's one unusual book recommendation you do? So not the typical product book like Inspired, but something different. What's something unusual?
Everyone's saying Inspired so far. Not a big fan of it. I think The Earned Life by Marshall Goldsmith. It's a very dear book to me. The Earned Life. This one? Let me hold it into the camera so you can watch yours. It's a very, very beautiful book about how not to get tied down in regret. It's a very important thing to me. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. And the last one, completely different, is what's your most frequently used tool in your product work?
My most recent one. What did I use today? Miro. Probably Miro. Yeah. I love visualizing everything I do in Miro because I don't read a lot of text. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Perfect. Well, it has been a pleasure. Very, very interesting conversation. What's what the audience can find you? And you've done tons of stuff. So what last message or where you want to direct people to?
If you want to connect with me, connect with my content. So Leah Tharin, so my first name and the last name.com. And that's it. I love being in touch with everyone. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time today. And have a good one. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.